In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you guys 4 composition tips to instantly improve your wildlife photos. These 4 tips are things that are constantly used by wildlife photographers. Most of them are very subtle things, but they make a huge impact on the photo when all added together and really take a photo from an amateur photo with, an okay composition to a great photo with a really good composition. So getting straight into it, let's not waste any time. The first tip is going to be one that I've mentioned in a previous tip video before, and the reason that I'm re-mentioning it and including it in this video as well is because it is so important, it is so essential, and I think that it is the #1 tip to making good wildlife photos that tell a powerful story, and that is to get low. And like I said, guys, I know I've mentioned this one before. I mentioned it in the 5 tips to make your wildlife photography instantly better video, but the reason that I'm mentioning it again is because it is just so important. I think it is the most important tip that a wildlife photographer can possibly give another wildlife photographer, is to get low, get down on the animal's eye level or below. To showcase this, I have a few example images here on Lightroom. This first one you can see here is of a grizzly bear that I photographed in Yellowstone this summer, and as you can see, I was up on a hill above this bear shooting down. And, while this is a beautiful bear, awesome looking bear here, walking in this direction, got a nice leg position. You can see the face, got a catchlight in the eyes. All of that is really nice. But the issue is I'm above this bear. So you feel like you're looking down on it. You don't feel like you're in the scene with the animal. You don't feel like you're right there with this bear. You feel like this is a snapshot or like something that could have even been taken in a zoo, because you're not down there with the animal and in an intimate moment, in an intimate scene with the animal. And that's what you want to have in your wildlife photos. You want to make the viewer feel like they're in that scene and having a moment with this animal. And that's not what an image like this does, because I'm above the bear. But if I were to go down to this image and take a look at this one here, now you can see that I've greatly improved that. Very similar images as far as the bear's pose, where the legs are, pretty similar leg position. Overall, these aren't that different of images as far as they're both grizzly bears and they both kind of have the same position in the photo. But the difference is I got low for this one. I was down on the eye level with this bear, and you can see how much more intimate this feels and how much more it feels like you're in the moment with this animal and here with this bear and actually in the scene when you get down on the eye level, as opposed to shooting above in an image like this. It just doesn't convey that same feeling. Not to mention that getting low also does something really cool with your foreground and your background here, and it blurs it out. If you shoot with a pretty wide open aperture, which f8 isn't too wide open, but you can shoot even wider than that, and what you're going to get is a nice blown out background like this, where it's blurred in the background, and then if you have a foreground that's pretty close up in front of you, it's going to blur that as well down here, and it's going to really put a focus on that animal. The only thing in focus is this bear, so what you're focused on is this bear. Your eye goes straight past this and hits the bear and doesn't go beyond the bear and wander back in here, because this is all blown out and blurry too. So basically what this does when you get low is it puts the background further behind the animal and puts the foreground closer to your camera and further from the animal, so it puts a focus only on that animal and blurs everything else, and really isolates that subject and puts a focus on that, which is exactly what you want. It creates more background and foreground blur than a moment like this, where you're don't really have any blur in the photo, and your eye can kind of wander into different areas, and all this is in focus, and it just doesn't put a clear focus on the bear like a photo like this does, where you've got some background and foreground blur. So getting low does so much for your photos and really will almost always make them better photos. And that's why I've mentioned it twice now in 2 different tips videos, and why I've mentioned it as the first tip in both of them, because this small compositional change is one of the most important aspects of creating good wildlife photos, in my opinion. So definitely get low for your wildlife photos. And before we get any farther in this video, guys, I do just want to briefly mention that I now have my website up and running. I've got a 2022 calendar up for sale over there. Got my full gallery, list of gear that I use, with links to purchase it, contact, about page, basically everything is on there. The website is fully set up and ready to go, and I would be very, very much appreciated if you would check that out. And if you are interested in a 2022 calendar, you can purchase those right over there on the website. So link down below if you're interested, and let's get back to the video. Now moving on to the second tip here. This is one of those tips that I talked about that is a really subtle change, but that will have a very big impact on your photo and will overall create a much more powerful composition than, if you did it any other way. And this is to give your subject a place to go in the frame. And I know that might not make sense when I first say it, but as I get into the examples here, it's going to make a lot more sense. So let's take a look at this first example here, which is a photo of a bison that I took in Hayden Valley. And this isn't processed, so to be fair, obviously it would look better processed. We'll just press auto and let it do its own thing there. Looks a little better now. But as you can see in this frame, I don't have much space behind the bison. I don't have much space in front of the bison. That's the key thing. And just overall, while the whole animal is in the frame, he doesn't have anywhere to go. He's clearly walking this direction, but within the frame, he doesn't have anywhere to go in that direction. So even though obviously in real life, he's in a massive valley, he's going to keep walking this direction. In this photo, he doesn't have anywhere to go. So to the viewer, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like your animal has somewhere to move in the frame and that he's moving in a certain direction. And just doesn't make for a good composition overall. And so how you fix this is by giving the animal somewhere to go in the frame. So if you take a look at an image like this of this gray wolf that I photographed in Yellowstone, you can see that the wolf is not in any way centered in my frame. The center of the frame would be somewhere right in here, and the wolf is way offset to this side, but it's made for a better composition. It's kind of just a subconscious thing for humans. We're looking at this. You might think that it would look better centered, but in reality, it really doesn't. It looks better when you offset the animal and you leave some space on this side in the direction that the animal is moving. In this case, that's the right side of the frame because the wolf is moving from the left to the right. You leave some space over there and it's going to create a better image. It's going to give your animal some space to move in the image and continue in one direction. And even though this is obviously a still image and the wolf is never going to move in the frame in reality, giving it a place to move in the frame creates a better image, a more powerful composition, and just creates a more natural feel for the image. It feels more natural to leave all this space over here for the wolf to move than it does to center your animal and leave no space for it to move in the frame. So that is the second tip. Leave space for those animals to move in the frame. And, it's a lot of dead space over here, but having it is essential to create a natural feel for this frame and to, give that feel that this wolf is moving across the landscape and has space to continue to move and not just make an awkward composition, to make a composition that feels natural. And one case where I wouldn't do that would be on a photo like this. The goat is moving in this direction, obviously, but he's facing in this direction. So I left space on this side of the frame. And that is the one exception to this rule. When the animal is looking back in the other direction, I usually tend to leave space in that other direction. Basically, whichever direction the head is pointed is the direction that I end up leaving space in. And that's, what you'll typically see in most compositions of other photographers as well. So that's the second tip, guys. Leave space for your animal to move, and you're going to create a more natural composition that just feels right and doesn't have that awkward feel that a photo like this bison photo has, where he just doesn't feel like he has anywhere to go in the photo. Now this third tip, guys, is another pretty subtle one, and it's one that I often struggle with. This is probably the one that I am most guilty of, and compositionally, this is probably the biggest problem that I still face as a photographer. And this is to eliminate distractions. And what I mean by this is there are these little things in your frame that will distract the viewer's eye from the main subject, from the animal in the frame. And while they may not seem like much, when you look at the photo as you're processing it, this one little rock might not seem like much. It actually is a lot, and it has a huge impact on the image and really can distract the viewer. So let me show you a few sample photos here to convey what I mean by this. Take a look at this photo here of a mountain goat high up in the Beartooth Mountains, right on the Montana-Wyoming border. You can see overall I've got a decent composition here with the animal. I've gotten low, I've gotten down on its eye level, got that nice blur foreground down here, blurred background. Overall, not a bad composition. I've got more space on this side. I've offset the goat off to this side a little bit. All the tips that I've given you so far, this image follows. But it's still not a great wildlife photo. And the reason why is because I have distractions in this photo. The main one being this rock right down here. This rock down here in the corner just really pulls your eye away from this goat. And when you're trying to put a focus on your subject, that's, obviously the goal with any wildlife photo is to put the focus on the subject of the photo. Having stuff like this just doesn't fly. This rock being out of focus in here while you have all this in focus, foreground around it. and having it kind of be dark right in here and a little bit light here, it just really pulls your eye away from the goat and is a distraction. And like I said, it's a very small, subtle thing. Typically, these distractions end up being very small things, but they end up having huge impacts on the viewer and can really distract away from the photo a lot more than you think. So, for example, with this rock, this one's a little too big to try this with, but I'm still gonna give it a go here and see if we can make it work. Could use the clone stamp tool, and what you're going to do is get that out of the photo. Now, ideally, you wouldn't need to use this tool. Ideally, you would, recompose the photo in the field and totally not have that rock in the photo. But if you get home and you're processing and you have to do this, then, you may have to do it in some cases. But as you can see, when I clone this section over to here, it doesn't totally look natural. If I was going to try to actually process this photo, I would make it look a lot more natural and put more work into it. But I'm just trying to do it for showcase purposes here. But you can see when I get that rock out of the frame, how much that brings your eye back to the goat. That distraction isn't sitting down here. Instead, your eye is allowed to go up here because you don't have that big rock just kind of sitting in the frame and pulling the viewer's eye away from the goat. Like I said, it's a subtle thing, very small. A lot of people will look at this and say, oh, that's no big deal. But in reality, to a viewer who didn't take the photo and who didn't process and make the photo, it's a huge deal. And now I've introduced another little distraction with this little black rock here. You can see just by taking that rock out how much that kind of pulls your eye back up here. You don't have that little distraction down here in the foreground. And obviously I would take this one out and this one out and this one out and all that stuff if I was going to go in and fully process this photo and really just get the distractions out of the photo is your goal. Another case of a distraction would be a line like this that runs across the animal's back. Again, a very subtle thing, but having this line cut through right across and kind of, the mountain range goes across the top of his back here, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't look good that way. You need to, either get lower, or in this case, if I'd stood up and put more of this mountain range above his back, it would have ended up looking a lot better. And now obviously then I would be, kind of disregarding some of the other composition rules that I've talked about, like keeping low on the animal's eye level. But those are all things that you just have to work with. You have to try to figure that out. And that's what makes wildlife photography so hard. You have to balance all of these tips. Like in this example, I've gotten low, but I've introduced this distraction by getting low. So now I have to figure out how to solve that. So you have to work around all these problems while also working with an animal that isn't cooperating most of the time to create the photo. And that's what makes it so difficult. But that's, another one of those things, this line. Very subtle, but very distracting. This rock behind his feet here. Another subtle thing, but if, this rock wasn't here and it was just this hillside behind his legs, it would be a lot less distracting. So now that I've discussed all that with you, let me show you an example of a good goat photo without distractions. A photo like this, you can see I don't have any of those distracting little rocks down in here. I don't have a line running across the top of the goat's backs. I do have this one cutting through them, which isn't ideal, but it's not as bad as one on the backs of the goats. I don't have a butt sticking in over here, even though there were goats on the sides of the frame there. I had to, try to compose it to keep them out of the frame, to bring the focus in on these two goats and make them the subject and not introduce those distractions in the frame. And that's why this image is so much better than these other goat photos that I've showed you here, because I've taken out all the distractions. And even though it was the exact same setting, I'm in the same spot with the same goats, just by eliminating those distractions, it's created a much better photo. So that's one of the biggest tips, and one that, like I said, I personally still struggle with a lot, is eliminating distractions. And it's one that is really going to have a huge impact on your photos always, because those distractions will really just kill your photo very quickly. And they're always super small and subtle, but they're big deals to the viewer. So that's the third tip, guys. And now moving into the end of this video with the fourth and final tip, we have one that, is very difficult to execute in a lot of cases, but is also very important and can really bring your images to the next level. This is one that I really want to focus on a lot more in the future. I felt like I did a pretty good job of doing it this summer with my time in Yellowstone, but it's one that I want to focus on developing even more in the future. And that is to zoom out and show the environment around the animal sometimes. So to give you some examples of what I mean by this, let's take a look at this bison silhouette photo here. Pretty cool photo here. Got a nice sharp silhouette of this bison standing on a hill, really moody with, the storm clouds behind it, this kind of dark foreground, and then the silhouette of the bison, just really nice moody photo here. But when you have a bison in a setting like this, where you've got all these clouds in the sky that are super interesting and moody and create kind of a story for the photo, you don't want to be zoomed in and have him fill up a ton of the frame. Obviously the bison is still going to be the subject and he is going to be the, you know, focus of your image, but you don't want to have him fill up too much of the frame. You want to include the environment when you have an interesting environment. So let me show you what happens when I zoomed out. Much better photo here. Again, the bison is still the focus, he's still the subject of the frame, but by including more of the surroundings, more of the environment, and shrinking the bison in the frame, it's immediately created a more powerful image. Again, it hasn't distracted from the bison. You don't want to do that. You don't want to ever zoom out in an environment that will create distractions and take away from the subject. You want to zoom out in an environment that will add to the story and make the subject look even better. And that's what I've tried to do in the case of this photo. Zoom out, show all these interesting cloud formations around this bison, but still keep him as the main subject and focus. And I think that it's something that can really take your photos to the next level. It's a lot of times difficult to do because it's more difficult to capture the animal you know, in a zoomed out landscape. All the pieces have to line up more properly. You know, you have to have the right clouds, you have to have the right foreground, and you have to have the bison. Whereas in a case like this, it doesn't have to line up as much. You don't have to have all the right clouds in the sky, and you don't have to have a large perfect foreground, a large clean foreground. You can have just a small foreground that's, you know, clean and looks good because you're zoomed in on the bison. It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult, is my point, to do a photo like this where you show the environment. But it always is a much more powerful image if you have an environment that complements your subject. One more example of this would be with my favorite image that I've ever taken, and that's of 399. Not this image, not the one I'm showing you right now, but this is the example image of what happens when you zoom in. What happens when you zoom out and you show 399 and the 4 cubs in their environment is you get an image like this, which is much better. 399 is in the exact same spot in this photo that she was in the last one. It's just that she sat down. But by zooming out, I was able to include all 4 of the cubs in here as well and show this hillside that they're on with all the sagebrush, this pine tree in the background that kind of runs up through the center of the frame, and all these trees back here in the background. Just really created a scene and a setting and included both the mother bear and the 4 cubs. And an image like this tells much more of a story than an image like this one, where you have just the bear in the frame. And so that is the 4th and final tip, guys, to zoom out and show the environment when the environment complements the animal. So those are my 4 composition tips to instantly improve your wildlife photos. I hope that you guys found these tips helpful, and I hope that you're able to apply these in the future to make your wildlife photos better. This video ended up being a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but the thing is, to me, composition is one of the very hardest things to learn with photography. And the best way to learn it is just through experience, through trial and error, failing and succeeding eventually, hopefully. So when you try to put it into words and you try to give people tips to explain it, it's very difficult. So this video ended up being a little longer than I'd hoped. I talked a little more than I wanted to on each tip, but I felt like I had to properly explain it to you guys. And I hope that I was able to convey all these different tips to you guys well, and that they're helpful and you're able to apply them to improve your photos. So with that, guys, thank you all so much for watching. As always, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video and like I said, found it helpful. If you haven't already, please do not forget to like and comment down below and let me know what you guys thought. Let me know if you enjoyed the video and if you'll be applying these tips to your wildlife photography. And if you haven't already, please do not forget to check out my Instagram and my Facebook, which will both be linked down below. And as always, most importantly, subscribe to be entered for the 1,000 subscriber manatee swim giveaway video. And with that, guys, thank you all again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.